Hi everyone, my name is Em and I'm continuing my series where my husband and I are watching all the Disney animated films in order and ranking them on a tier list. This next one is Pinocchio, and before we get started I'm going to talk about some history because I believe that it's always good to learn and that historical context is important for some of these pieces, and I love to do my own research, so let's get into it. Pinocchio premiered at the Center Theater in New York City on February 7th, 1940. It is loosely based on Carlo Collodi's The Adventures of Pinocchio, which is a story written in 1883. The movie, Pinocchio, won 2 Academy Awards. One of the awards was for the original score, and the other one was for the original song, When You Wish Upon a Star, which makes sense. It is iconic, and it will serve to be Disney's theme song for the rest of its life and career, essentially. We all remember the logo, the old logo, and the new logo has the song as well. It was initially a commercial failure due to World War II because the European and Asian markets were cut off. It is widely acclaimed by many, many different sources, which I find interesting because Pinocchio is not a movie that I hear talked about a lot. The movie itself, the character and everything, yes, I would argue that a lot of the classic characters are talked about, but the movie, I can't remember the last time someone talked to me about the movie Pinocchio. But I can remember when people have talked to me about the other films, just not Pinocchio. So I find it interesting that it is so widely acclaimed, and it has a 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which Snow White doesn't even have a 100% rating, so I find that interesting. Like Snow White, it has been added to the National Film Registry. In September of 1937, while Snow White was nearing the end of its production, animator Norman Ferguson brought a copy of Carlo Collodi's The Adventures of Pinocchio to Walt's attention, and after reading it, Walt was very enthusiastic about the story. He commissioned the first woman storyboard artist at the company, Bianca Majoli, to create an outline based on the book. She was an Italian-born artist. She was an Italian-American, and so she had her roots in this Italian style. But Walt initially rejected it because it was too faithful to the story material. Pinocchio was actually supposed to be the 3rd movie released by Disney after Bambi, but there were complications with Bambi, and so that project was postponed and Pinocchio was released before. And Pinocchio had some difficulties with matching with the source material. Unlike Snow White, the original story was very fixed, and it didn't have a lot of wiggle room to build creativity and make their own story. And due to this, the story went through many changes before the final incarnation that we know as the movie. One being the change of Pinocchio's character. In the novel, Pinocchio is honestly kind of a jerk. He's ungrateful, he's rude, he's pretty much a brat. And so in that version of the story, he only learns his lessons the hard way. And so they wanted to change that and make Pinocchio's character a little bit more likable. Early scenes were animated with Pinocchio's design being that of a wooden puppet, as most other adaptations have done. Most of them have given him that wooden look. But Walt did not like this design. He felt that an audience could not sympathize with a character that just looks like a puppet. And I have to agree. I think that part of the charm of Pinocchio is that he is childlike and that he looks like a child. The design we know and love for Pinocchio was created by Milk Call, who decided to make Pinocchio look quote, like a cute little boy, you can always draw the wooden joints and make him a wooden puppet afterwards, end quote. He then showed Walt some test animation footage with the new design, and Walt loved it. Due to this, he then urged the writers to make Pinocchio into more of an innocent, naive young boy to match the new design. The character of the cricket is a very small part in the original story. It is an unnamed character that warns Pinocchio of the dangers of laziness and disobedience. And they argue, and then Pinocchio eventually gets so mad that he throws a mallet and accidentally kills the cricket. Disney, however, found that the young and naive portrayal became too helpless and trusting, and they needed a guide to help Pinocchio through the story. So then Jiminy Cricket was born. Jiminy Cricket was originally planned to look much more realistic and closer to a realistic cricket, but Walt disapproved of the idea, wanting something more likable. Ward Kimball, which we mentioned in the last video, here we go, Ward Kimball again, was tasked to be supervising animator for Jiminy Cricket. The famous design is a product of his mind. He has joked Jiminy, quote, was a cricket because we called him a cricket, end quote. Due to the popularity of Snow White, Walt wanted more famous voices for the cast of Pinocchio, and this is the first Disney film to use celebrities as voice actors. Popular singer at the time, Cliff Edwards, was cast to play Jiminy Cricket. And Cliff Edwards, I just don't believe that When You Wish Upon a Star would be as possible or as popular without his specific voice. His voice just fits the song so well. And I love that song specifically. And I think it's just a beautiful, gorgeous song that to me is synonymous with Disney. I know the instrumental version is normally what's in these intros, but I truly believe that you listen to the one with lyrics and the one from the movie, and you feel that warmth. You feel the warmth of the Disney classics, and that song brings. It's such just a loving message. I can't describe the warmth that is felt, but it is. Walt did not like the idea of having an adult play Pinocchio and cast 11-year-old Dickie Jones for the part. This is an interesting fact, but Mel Blanc, who is known for voicing the Looney Tunes, voiced Gideon the cat, but then it was decided that the character would be mute, so all we have left from his recordings is hiccups. So those are Mel Blanc's hiccups. When you hear Gideon hiccup, those are Mel Blanc's hiccups, which I find really interesting and a niche piece of animation history. The animation work began in January of 1938, actually very close to the release of Snow White. So they moved from basically ground zero to boom, let's get this project done, which is interesting because Snow White premiered in December and they began animation work on Pinocchio in January of 1938. So I find it interesting, that turnaround. But they did have some problems. Like I said, there were character and story rewrites. And so because of this, the animating would be on pause for the main character, and then supporting characters would be worked on in April, but then full animation did not resume until after rewrites were completed in September. So a few months shy of a year after Snow White premiered. This movie began the practice of making three-dimensional clay models known as maquettes for animators to reference. This is so that animators can see what a character would look like from any angle. Maquettes were also made for the elaborate cuckoo clocks in Geppetto's house, as well as a maquette for Stromboli's wagon and the coachman's carriage. However, those moving vehicles proved to be difficult to animate, so they filmed the maquettes on a miniature set using stop-motion animation for the reference. Live-action pantomime footage was shot for Pinocchio, much like Disney did for Snow White, but rather than tracing like they did with rotoscoping, they used the footage as a guide to study the movements and incorporated some of the poses and some of the faces that these pantomime actors made into the animation. Pinocchio is groundbreaking in its special effects used in animation. If you watch Pinocchio, you'll notice the difference between that and Snow White. In fact, a lot of people praise it for being leaps and bounds ahead of Snow White. I disagree with that. I think that they chose to go with a more cartoony art style compared to the realistic art style. And so then Pinocchio kind of stood out because it had that cartoonier style and it felt more distinct, and it was, I hate to say easier to draw, but they were more versed in how to draw cartoony than what they did with Snow White and the Queen and the Prince, where it was more realistic. And so in that way, I think they were a little bit out of their element there. But I think that either way, you notice an up in quality in Pinocchio with the animation effects. It was groundbreaking for animation effects. Animation effects are anything other than the characters themselves. So examples are smoke, fire, rain, vehicles, machinery, sparkles. The pixie dust in Peter Pan is a special effect. And so it's anything like that. And we did not see much of that in Snow White. A lot of the effects that we saw were also part of the character's animation. So it's very interesting with this movie, because there are so many settings, because there are so many scenes, because there are so many different things, we did get a up in quality and an up in innovation. And for the ocean, to give more depth, animators put more detail into the waves in the foreground and less detail as the surface moved back. After the animation was traced onto cells, animators would go in with pencils to give the waves a more realistic look. These techniques helped make Pinocchio one of the first animated films to have highly realistic special effects. When it was released on home video, it became the best-selling home video title of the year. Additionally, when it was restored on VHS and Laserdisc, it sold 13.5 million copies. I could not find a number on how much it sold with the home video title when it was initially released. When it was released, Variety praised the animation compared to Snow White, stating, quote, "Animation is so smooth that cartoon figures carry impression of real persons and settings rather than drawings to onlooker." End quote. I think that I agree. I think that the animation in Pinocchio is smoother. But I don't doubt for a second that I'm watching a cartoon. I think that comparatively, Snow White is more realistic in art style. And that's not a diss. I love Pinocchio as well. I think that Pinocchio is great. It doesn't have as much of a place in my heart as Snow White. I didn't really watch Pinocchio as a kid. I don't believe that my family owned Pinocchio, which is a hot take. I think this is only my second time watching Pinocchio, but I do enjoy Pinocchio. And I think that it is good. I just don't think that it carries the impression of real people and settings. I think that in its own cartoon world it does. I think that it does convey a sense of immersion, I guess. But I get immersed in both stories. So, but to each their own. The Hollywood Reporter also stated that the animation quality was better, and I agree. I will, however, make the point, I did say this earlier, the Hollywood Reporter does talk about the animation quality, and in my notes, I did talk about how Pinocchio was going for a more stylization than the semi-hyper-realistic Snow White. And despite the critical acclaim, Pinocchio was not a box office success, like I said, due to the war. It cost double what Snow White did and only recouped about half of the cost by the end of 1940. Like I stated earlier, due to World War II, a lot of the world was cut off from the release of this movie, which most likely led to this loss of money. And this reportedly hurt Walt heavily, and he got very depressed about it, which totally makes sense when your last gamble made so much. And so you put a lot of eggs in this basket, not knowing that you could not release it everywhere. And that can just be circumstances sometimes. And that's hard. That's hard when the art that you try to release doesn't work. And it's hard when there are setbacks. But I will say, Pinocchio has proved to be a success in subsequent years. Like I said, it was top selling in its home video releases, and Pinocchio proved to be a success in its subsequent theatrical re-releases. And after its last release in 1992, Pinocchio had earned $43,518,226.66 gross between all the re-releases in the United States and Canada when adjusted for inflation to 2025's money. That is all of it. They did say some international stuff, but I wasn't sure whether or not. I couldn't get a good count for after 1992. I don't know if it was internationally released in 1992, but I could not get a good count for 1992 for international release. In an article by The Guardian, it was selected as one of the 10 best animated films of all time in 2001. But that stupid South Park movie was there again. In 2011, it was named number 1 of the 25 all-time best animated movies by Time magazine. What was number 6? I don't know what the deal is with this movie, but when I've gone on these lists, because there were multiple linked in the Wikipedia for Pinocchio, when I go on these lists to see these things and to look at these accolades, I don't know why this movie is there. I can't understand it, and I don't want to watch it. So if someone could just explain to me what it was. My husband thinks it's because just that style of animation was brand new, and I guess it kind of paved the way for adult animation in a way. According to the American Film Institute, when voted on, Pinocchio is the second greatest animated movie, with Snow White being the first. When You Wish Upon a Star is ranked 7th in their list of the top 100 songs in American cinema. Can you guess what's not on that list? A win is a win. And the American Film Institute, I like you. We should be friends. Jiminy Cricket has since become somewhat of an iconic character, later appearing in Fun and Fancy Free, which we will talk about later, The Mickey Mouse Club, and Mickey's Christmas Carol. He has kind of become his own entity in that way. And I find it cool because he is really cool and iconic, and I believe that he deserves that. I think he's also in Snowden at the House of Mouse, and so we will talk about him again. Figaro was such a hit with audiences that he began to be animated into Mickey Mouse shorts as Minnie's cat. I thought that I heard something that Walt liked Figaro so much as well, that Figaro ended up being Minnie's cat. Don't take that as fact because I don't know if that is fact. There was a Pinocchio sequel in development by Disney Toon Studios, but to my joy, because I have around 120 movies to watch. Not anymore. I have 117 movies left. But to my joy, this Pinocchio sequel was canceled in 2006 when John Lasseter became chief executive officer at Disney. And that's all I really have for Pinocchio, other than the legacy is felt. I mean, Pinocchio is a very big part of the Disney parks for some odd reason. a ride at Disneyland with 2 restaurants, one at Disney World and one in Disneyland Paris. There used to be one at Disneyland, but that no longer exists. Pinocchio and Geppetto are often walk-around characters at the park. And so, although this movie has a lot less to talk about than Snow White, it is still important as well because it is also still a trailblazer in the effects that it used and in the art style. I believe that the art style was also kind of a trailblazer because it was not realistic. It was cartoony, and so proving that actually cartoony art style could be used in this context. I think also it is just kind of a story of morals, more or less. And it's timeless, and as I will kind of talk about in my thoughts, there are people who talk about it like it is very peak cinema. I believe that it is not very peak cinema. Not that it's not peak cinema. I do believe that it is pretty decently simple in plot, and I believe that other animated films have a lot more deeper things to it. Like this is, when it comes to media literacy, I hate to say it, this movie's a Hershey's chocolate bar. This movie's a Hershey's chocolate bar when it comes to media literacy. Everything is basically told to you, and you don't really have to dig deep into it. That being said, it's a good time. A lot of other Disney movies, I feel, are somewhere from 30 to 70% dark chocolate, where there is some richness and there is some things to explore in there and some conversations to have about these works. But I digress. That is my opinion, and we will now be moving on to my husband and I's thoughts after watching the movie. Okay, so we just finished Pinocchio. I will say, it had much more of a plot, and the beginning of it, honestly, I think until right after Pleasure Island, I was kind of feeling it, I was vibing, but then, when they went to go search for Monstro, so the Monstro scene was just a little bit too long. The search for Monstro scene. Once they found Monstro, chill and vibey. I don't think it was really explained. Maybe this is just me, and because, we watched it a little bit too close to bedtime, but I think that, I didn't understand. I had to ask you, why was he in a boat, and why did he have Cleo and Figaro there? Oh, that's another thing. I love Cleo and Figaro. I think they're iconic, and I think they're really cute, and I think they add to the story a little bit more and kind of show, the love Geppetto can possibly have for a child. I mean, Figaro has his own bed, and they all get, meals cooked by him and stuff like that. So I think it, just shows Geppetto's capacity. And I think that storytelling that is very beautiful. When You Wish Upon a Star is a beautiful song. I don't know. I think Pinocchio in general is a good movie. It's terrifying. Let me just say. Terrifying. There were moments, with the Pleasure Island stuff where I was like, dang, this is scary. But, it's good morals for children. There is a bad word in it. It's said twice. But it is to describe donkeys. And so if we were talking to our children, we've kind of agreed that we would kind of have described that it's literal, but also in a way they are making themselves out to be idiots, which is how it's used.
Being double-sided. Words using both meanings of the phrase to mean both literally a donkey and also just a person who's wasted their life away on pleasure.
Yes, and I think that Stromboli is a very heavily underrated villain. He had me laughing basically the entire time he was on screen. I think that... What?
I was going to say, if Stromboli was an actor, I know that there is a live-action Pinocchio. I've not seen it. But Stromboli as a character has to be played by a theater kid. He has the theater kid vibe entirely down to a T.
I agree. Honest John and Gideon were also pretty funny. We kind of got some chuckles out of Honest John and Gideon moments as well. And so I think that's why, like, after Pleasure Island, it kind of drags. And I think it's because, like, all the comedy is gone. Like, there is no comedy after the Pleasure Island part.
Part of it's also just that scene with finding Monstro is really long. I think that scene really kind of takes some of the wind out of the sails of the movie.
I think it did too. Like I said earlier, like the Finding Monstro scene, like we turned to each other after we watched that and was like, dog, they should have found Monstro 5 minutes sooner. Like it does so much of setting up Monstro. The fish do not like Monstro. The fish are scared of Monstro, kind of thing. And it just becomes derivative after a time. And it also becomes something of like Pinocchio's moving so much further than Jiminy Cricket. And so you're so scared that Jiminy's going to lose Pinocchio in this scene. And you're like, and they need to be together. It's a whole thing. And you're just like, it's kind of a little bit emotional whiplashing. But then you're also like, is this scene over yet? Like, we're looking for Geppetto. And we can't find this stupid whale anywhere. So, yeah. Overall, I think it's like a solid B. It definitely had some good parts. It had more of a plot than Snow White. It definitely had some good moments. And I think that it is iconic. I think that there are iconic parts of it. And I think that in a way it is also underrated. I don't know as much about this one, so I'll have an interesting and a fun time researching it. I know that for sure. I think that, like, if it had stayed consistent in its pacing, it would have been, and in its comedy, the way that Snow White was, I think Snow White had better balance than Pinocchio did, because it felt like the end dragged so bad. Like,
I think the end could have been trimmed a little bit, but I think it was just the third act that really needed most of the trimming.
Yeah, I think the third act needed some trimming as well. And
maybe not trimming, but adjustment. I was kind of thinking, because you mentioned you were having difficulty understanding why Geppetto was there. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could have replaced some of the length of the Finding Monstro scene with where they're under the water and stuff. Replace a portion of it with one that it goes back to Geppetto, which I guess chronologically this wouldn't make sense, so you'd mainly just be cutting out this time to move it to an earlier part of the film, but have a part where he, gets the boat sailed to start looking for Pinocchio.
Yeah, I think that having that setup would have been or even have it in the letter, because there's the letter that comes from the Blue Fairy being like, oh, your dad's missing.
Oh, it does mention in that.
Does it?
Yeah, it mentions that he was caught by Monstro.
He was caught by Monstro, but it doesn't mention how he was caught by Monstro. That's like, true. If it had said while he was looking for you, Pinocchio, he was caught by Monstro. Because, like, maybe it's weird in my head. I kind of have the VeggieTales version also in my head. And I don't exactly remember the circumstances of the VeggieTale one. But I know that they're different. Maybe it shows that he's on a boat or something.
No, they go to like a boardwalk of sorts. That pretty much scams them out their money.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't remember if his father.
What do you mean about his father? If his father's there? I mean, his father shows up at the end to save him, basically. But I don't think they have a whale scene.
I remember a whale scene.
I don't remember. It's been forever.
If you want us to watch Pistachio, let us know and compare and contrast. I think that Pinocchio is good. Just that Monstro scene just takes you out of it and it starts dragging so quickly. And there are some good jokes at the end, but it just, after that Monstro scene, you're like, this movie is like gonna end in like 20 minutes. Can we just let it end, please? And so for that reason, it kind of brings it down. Like, I would have had it like at around the level of Snow White, but then because of it kind of dragged at the end, I kind of had to put it at a high B tier.
I pretty much agree to that, like a mid to high tier B.
Yeah, so that's our ranking, and that's our comments on Pinocchio. I still think it's a good watch. Kiddos might have nightmares about Pleasure Island, though.
Scare them into doing good things and not wasting their lives away.
That's true, but you might also want to explain if you are a non-cursing household, you might want to explain that to your kiddos and how it's literal. If you want to avoid it altogether, that's okay as well.
I would not even just tell them it's literal. I would tell them it's double meaning, because it is.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is double meaning, but like I was turning to him during Pinocchio. And the Pleasure Island scene can just be a little jarring. Like, even me, as a fully grown adult, was like, this is kind of scary. Like, with how it all I gotta say is, like, I think that Claude Coates had a part in it. And if you don't know who Claude Coates is, that's the guy who suggested that at the end of the Mr. Toad ride, it should end in hell to discourage reckless driving. How'd you feel?
I wasn't too frightened, but that might have been because I was playing Resident Evil 2 just like a couple minutes before we started watching the movie.
And I was playing Disneyland Adventures this afternoon. I will say, Pinocchio, really, really annoying in that game. Pinocchio in this, he's just a regular old boy. Yeah. Pinocchio in that game is an absolute menace. He's like, this happened. Can you help me? Instead of actually like taking accountability and doing it himself. Which is a little bit more annoying when it's not in the plot of a film. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say.
Subscribe.
Any final thoughts on Pinocchio?
For Trucchio.
If you'd like my review of Taming of the Shrew, let me know.
Are we gonna time travel back to Shakespeare and like see them live? Is that what you're trying to say?
There are recorded productions of Taming of the Shrew.
Of Shakespeare?
Yeah.
Like he himself?
No.
Directing?
No, I mean like the Royal Shakespeare Company.
That's what I meant. I meant like going and seeing actual Shakespeare.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, we're tired. So wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Hi diddly dee. 116 movies left for me. Okay, bye.